back to the Bates Museum of Art podcast. I'm your host, Morgan, and this week we are doing a few different interviews with our interns. So, all of our interns this semester have been working on one project together, which is not atypical at the museum. We often have them work on pretty large scale projects, mostly related to upcoming exhibitions. So, this semester we had a cohort of 11 interns, and we're going to hear from a few of them this week. And a little bit of background on this project that our interns were working on. It is related to an upcoming show, our John Bullard Ceramics Collection show, coming late 2025. This show is pretty large scale, especially for our tiny little museum here in Lewiston, Maine. It encompasses almost 150 individual ceramic objects, and as such, a lot of different artists as well. And these artists are particularly influential in the American ceramics scene. And we're working mostly in the 20th century, just to give you a little bit of an idea of the scope and scale that our interns were working at. The donator of this collection, John Bullard, is the director emeritus of the New Orleans Museum of Art. He worked there for 37 years, and in his retirement, he has grown a pretty substantial collection, and he's donated quite a few objects to our museum. He is also tied to the Haystack Mountain School of Crafts in Deer Isle, Maine, so you might recognize him or his name a little bit if you're from this area. Our first intern that we will be talking to today is Hannah. Would you like to introduce yourself, Hannah?
Hi, my name is Hannah. I'm a sophomore from New York, and I'm a history and politics double major at Bates.
Awesome. So, Hannah, would you be able to tell us a little bit about your research, maybe some of the objects that you researched, and some of the cool things that you found?
Absolutely. So I have been doing about 8, 9 different objects from the Bullard collection, and something that's really struck me is just how different they all are. I've had to research Japanese pottery, I've had to research European porcelain, just a whole range of things from all over the world, which has been really exciting, and I feel like I've gotten a lot of history learning throughout it.
That's really interesting. So, I guess maybe one of my first questions that I have for you is what object in particular were you really drawn to?
I think the first one that I did is a Charles Counts piece called Vase with Fingers, and I was really drawn to it because of the carving on the object, and there's sort of this circular design with people, but it's a very you can't quite make out the forms of the people all the time, and so I was really excited to see the piece in person and to see how like some of them you can actually see their faces, some of them you can't even quite tell it's a person. So sort of interpreting that was really interesting, and also seeing that he was working in Nigeria at the time and that craft influence on his like more fine art, and sort of trying to not have as big of a distinction between those two things was really interesting.
So that's a really, really great point that you just brought up. A few things, actually. Number one is that a lot of these pieces sort of toe the line between fine arts and what we might think of as traditional craft, and quite intentionally, they sort of blur that line to play on that idea of, well, what is fine art? Another thing along that same same line is that some of these pieces are intentionally sort of crossing boundaries between functionality and um, just pure beauty or pure aesthetics. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there is definitely some pieces that are more sculptural, and the artists even say in the artist statement that they're not meant to be functional. But for the majority of them, they are functional. And I think that's something that's really important to point out is like, even if something is made to be functional, that doesn't mean that it's not also aesthetic and not also art. And that there's often this divide between like European or Western fine art that's often created by men and craft art, which is often seen as women's work. So trying to break down that division a little bit and see the beauty within this like quote unquote craft work is really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so I have another question for you, and maybe doesn't have to be like something super particular, but Was there something that was unexpected to you that you discovered while you were
Mm.
researching?
I don't know if it was unexpected per se, but I was researching a lot of like porcelain, and Jack Earl, one of the artists that I was researching, took a lot of inspiration from the Messin porcelain factory. And I was at the Met a few weeks ago, just kind of lost, to be honest, and wandering through, and I stumbled upon figures that were from the factory and that I'd seen as like an inspiration for his own work, and that he clearly had taken these very aristocratic figures and made them into like an animal human crossover. So it was very much like his own interpretation and using his own background to like add something to this aristocratic European idea of porcelain. So that was really cool for me to just like stumble across it, and it sort of made me realize like the more I research things in art history, the more it like all makes sense and fits together, which is really cool.
That's awesome. I had not heard that story, so I'm really glad that you got the opportunity to share that with us. Um, so, in your time, really spending time with these objects and researching, but also closely looking at them, is there one particular technique related to ceramics that you've become more fond?
I think I'm going back to Charles Counts, the I don't even know how to say it correctly, sgraffito carving
Yeah,
was really interesting because I think we always think of like painting on something rather than carving into it to create a pattern, and it's something that seen as I've been going to more and more museums of like now I know what that is, which is really interesting to be able to see that. I was at the Portland Museum of Art last weekend and I saw a Jackson Pollock piece that was said it was gravito carved. I was like, whoa, I actually know what that is now, which was really interesting. And it's just cool to see the different like ways that you can create an image on a piece of artwork.
very cool. So I guess my final question to you would be, for our next cohort of interns who will be taking on a large scale project like this in the future. Do you have any advice for them or any particular research tips or hacks related to art history?
Mhm. I think definitely break it down into manageable chunks. Like when I first got the list of artists, I created a Google Doc that was like broken down by each artist and each piece of artwork so I could do like one at a time and really spend my time on it and get really into the art history of that particular piece. And then once I'd done that in a more individual way, I was able to read through the whole document and see a lot of the through lines, like seeing that a lot of them went to Alfred University or seeing this like craft sculpture divide, and just really being able to see those big themes and then creating another page of like what are the big themes, the big takeaways from this. So seeing it at both like a really detailed level, but also a higher order concerns was I think makes the research more meaningful and exciting.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Hannah. We really appreciated your input and your expert research skills, and we hope that you will come and see the 2025 John Bullard Collection Show so that you can see these amazing pieces that Hannah has talked about. I'm joined today with another one of our wonderful intern core members, Ella. Ella, would you like to introduce yourself today?
Sure. Thanks, Morgan. My name is Ella Hannaford. I'm a junior from South Portland, Maine, and I am a studio art and visual culture major with an art history and criticism minor. So, very much centered in the arts, especially
Yeah.
this semester.
Awesome. So Ella is one of our researchers working on our current John Bullard Collections project. So I invited her on today to talk a little bit about what she's done this semester. She's done a lot of um, research and really deep digging into what this collection really embodies. So she's going to talk about that with us today. So Ella, can you just give a quick overview of a little bit about what you researched this semester?
Sure. So, I was working to research many of the objects within the John Bullard collection that we were gifted ahead of an exhibition that we're putting on this fall. And a lot of the research that we've been doing is informing that exhibition, informing the exhibition catalog that we're going to be creating to go along with the exhibition, which is so exciting. I've never had any writing published before, and so it's providing a really fun and worthwhile opportunity to kind of get my voice out there in the arts a little bit more.
Absolutely.
So I feel really grateful.
So in your research, what was the most, I guess, unexpected thing that you uncovered, or something that maybe surprised you?
I mean, one thing is that, a lot of the Bullard collection is situated within the American studio ceramics movement. And although I didn't have a lot of knowledge or experience within ceramics on the whole, I especially didn't have any within the American studio ceramics movement. I have taken one ceramics class at Bates. I was lucky enough to take a tile making and design short term with Professor Dewsnap. But a lot of the imagery that I was pulling for my own designs, something that I've been really interested in my own studies through a bunch of my classes, through math classes, through art classes, has been Islamic geometric tile work. And so I was studying a lot of Islamic geometric tiles and trying to pay homage to the styles and the processes that produce that kind of ceramics. And so I think one thing, tiles are very flat, they're very square.
Right.
And so one thing that I've really enjoyed learning about is how a lot of these pieces were created using a mixture of wheel throwing and hand building techniques.
Very cool.
Which I find extremely impressive. And sometimes the way that one artist chooses to use one over the other is unexpected. You might think that something was hand built, but then you realize that it was thrown on the wheel, or vice versa. Some of the pots that I've been researching look so perfect that you would think that they were wheel thrown, but then you realize that they were coil built, which is just kind of mind blowing.
Very cool. Very cool. So I guess I'm curious about a little bit about maybe one or two of the artists that you were researching and what you uncovered in that research, and I guess maybe a small synopsis of what you wrote about.
Sure. One that comes to mind for me, I believe it's created by Mike Helke.
Yes.
And it's called Eccentric Ewer. And I find that ewer's really interesting. The word itself,
Yes.
It kind of doesn't sound like a word anymore. But also because it's this object that was kind of created by ceramists who wanted another form to explore.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of exists within the art history field, but isn't necessarily used a lot in
Right.
common life. But I found his especially interesting because it has this very kind of blocky, modern shape that goes along with this very stark black and white kind of cubist. What's the word I'm looking for? Glazing and painting. And it reminded me a lot of, some of Picasso's work, some Mondrian works as well. Just kind of building into that cubist geometric technique that I'm so used to seeing in painting, but not necessarily in three-dimensional objects. And one thing that I found really interesting about it is I'm someone who, in my own work, likes to have form reflect content. And so in this way, having its form, its shape, be completely reflective of his technique of glazing it, just made it a really successful piece in my mind.
Definitely. And thank you for that, Ella. That was really, really insightful and super cool. So my last question for you, Ella, is, I guess this is really simple, but what was your favorite part of this project?
I really enjoyed getting to work with the fellow interns because, this was a group project. And so even as you're kind of taking a deep dive into your research, I was so grateful for the weekly meetings and hearing, what other people had questions about or interesting things that they found. And so it just kind of situated it in the larger context of the collection itself, which is so impressive. You know, one of the best things about this collection is just its sheer size. It's so impressive how John Bullard was able to collect all of these objects over the course of his life and his career, and his generosity in giving them to us. And so, kind of having those moments of being aware not just of the objects that you're researching specifically, but how they're situated. You know, another part of the research is figuring out the education and the influences of the artists that you're studying who created these objects. And so certain names will start to pop up over and over again. And so it's really about this community. And I feel like that's reflected in the way that the museum has structured, you know, attacking this kind of massive research project. So I've been really grateful for that.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. I'm joined today with another one of our intern core group members. Would you like to introduce yourself, Aiden?
Sure, thanks, Morgan. So, my name is Aiden Lewinter. I am from Mount Kisco, New York. I am a first year student at Bates, and I am planning on being a double major in theater and arts and visual culture on the history and criticism side.
Thanks, Aiden. So Aiden has been working on researching our John Bullard collection, as a lot of our interns that we've talked to have been. And Aiden has been doing some really, really cool stuff here at the museum. So we're going to talk to him today a little bit about that. So Aiden, I'm just curious, could you give like a quick overview of maybe one or two things that you researched?
Sure, so, I researched a bunch of really interesting contemporary pieces, but some of my favorite pieces were a Tim Mather piece. He, has been working for a while. This piece was created in the 80s, and it's really interesting because it is kind of both functional and sculptural in a way. So it's a covered jar, but it has some really interesting, like, elements of industry and nature crafted in the handle and the lid. And that's also been super interesting. I'll also say another artist that I've loved researching would be Faraday Newsome, who, and this is a much more contemporary work. It's like a wall plaque, actually, called Spring Moon, which was created in 2022, which uses really interesting colors and sculptural elements to create, like, a scene on a wall, which is super interesting.
That's awesome. So Aiden, I'm also curious about the most unexpected thing that you discovered while you were researching.
Well, I'd say that probably the thing that, like, surprised me most. I think there were a lot of things that were unexpected because I don't personally have a lot of experience yet with contemporary American ceramicists. But something in the process that was really surprising and interesting was doing the research based on images online, and then once we got the pieces in person, like, there was one specific piece by the artist Matthew Metz, which it looks like it's like a three-tiered cake. It's a vase, but it looks like it's a three-tiered cake. And so I thought it was just round from the pictures. And then when it came in person and we got to, like, hold it and look at it, it was actually, like, super oblong and, like, super, like, thin in a way. So
Cool.
it kind of just, like, completely changed my understanding of the piece. Like, I was really surprised
Yeah.
because it was not what I was expecting.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. That feeling of like getting to see something that you've been spending a lot of time with, I guess like academically, but it's not like physically in front of you, is it is like a really different experience. So thank you for sharing that. And I guess that kind of goes into our next question, about like what was your favorite part of working on the John Bullard collection project?
I'd say for me, probably my favorite part was definitely the diversity of the pieces. It wasn't like I was working on, like, 17 different 17th century plates. Like,
Right.
it was just all different. Yes, they're all contemporary American ceramics, but they are from still kind of a range of time and so many different styles. And, with my pieces and even seeing the pieces that my fellow interns were working on, just like, yeah, the diversity of styles and techniques and iconography and just everything. it kept it really like interesting and exciting because each time I would go to research a new piece, it would be like I'm looking at a whole nother thing.
Yeah. So I guess maybe my final question for you then is, in this large, I mean, this is 150, about 150 piece collection. Um, and there is a lot of stylistic diversity and diversity of artists. Did you find that there was any sort of common thread amongst what you were looking at?
Yeah, so it was really interesting because some of the artists that were both kind of like in my domain that were actually connected, um, George Macaulay, who is a pretty well-known ceramicist, actually made a documentary about Ron Myers, who he was a student of and then worked with for a long time. So it was just really interesting. And there are also like stylistic similarities between their pieces, but also just the way in which the ceramics world is linked and like everybody kind of knows everybody in a way, and seeing the ways in which the different pieces are inspired by others, or seeing pieces that like completely like throw caution to the wind and just like take a completely different direction. But it's been really interesting seeing like the stylistic and also personal collections between the connections between the artists.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the ceramics world is, I mean, ceramics as a practice has historically been a very communal form of art making. And so it's cool to see that reflected in this collection as well. When you really start to spend time with these pieces and look at, although they might have very distinct differences, they are sort of rooted in the same communal practice. We see that in how a lot of these artists attended the same universities, the same training programs, which is really what you were getting at there. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. That was really cool.